Good evening, darling. So I wanted to answer this poor hobbit who's trying to win elves question about sort of how to go about that, what sort of things you should do as far as contacting the family or any gifts or anything that you should avoid doing. So we're going to cover sort of very generally because actually depending on, of course, what type of elf you're wooing, there's sort of a lot of traditional differences as far as the appropriate ways to go about courtship. So an Noldor, for instance, is going to have very different courtship rituals from a Sylvan elf and a Sylvan elf from a Sindar and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to sort of talk about the more general things and sort of answer the specific questions that you asked as far as what to do. So before you go about contacting the family, which is something you are going to eventually do, the first thing you want to do is to make the official verbal confirmation. This sounds very serious, and it sort of is. So you have to find a time to declare your feelings officially. It doesn't have to sort of be in front of anyone or anything like that, although it says official. This just means this is your formal declaration of intent to your beloved. So actually it's one of the more sort of exciting, wonderful things that happens for elves. I don't know how much you do or don't know, because of course most of the books that deal with this are in Elvish, mostly not even in Sindarin, but in older forms of Elvish, so I can understand why you're having trouble finding the information. But, oh, this red wine is absolutely dreadful. What was I saying? Oh yes, so you just need to tell your intended exactly how you feel and where you want to proceed with the relationship. Now, elves, as far as emotions go, typically, it's sort of we feel them, of course, and deeply, but in sort of a very controlled manner. We can sort of logically break down what is going on for us emotionally, with the exception of when we are in love. It's sort of it's like having the floodgates suddenly bursting open, and it's a very sort of erratic, all-consuming, passionate sort of thing. And so, of course, when we first start feeling these feelings, which are so much more intense and sort of out of our control than we normally feel, we sort of usually try to buckle down on it a little bit, to make sure, of course, that this is seriously what we want, because we elves don't typically have but one marriage in our lifetimes, which are, of course, very long. So it's very serious, and we take a lot of time to sort of ensure that we're making the right decision all along the way. So the formal declaration is, of course, the first step, which is to make sure that you both have the same intentions for the relationship, and that you both are feeling the same way. As far as sort of what that entails, it's really just you saying how you feel, and it's not sort of as formalized as many of the other courtship rituals, despite the fact that it is called the formal declaration. So I'm going to move on because we've already gone through so much time. The next step, of course, does have to do with informing the parents, and typically when you do this, you want to present a gift. Now, this isn't something expensive or extravagant. This is simply a small token of who you are. So you're trying to find a gift that basically incorporates all of the aspects of yourself. I've heard of things as simple as a single flower petal to sort of do this. Now, that said, sort of who gets gifts, how many gifts, how distant the relatives are that are involved, who all has to be present, that all depends, of course, on what type of elf you're wooing. So I would say to sort of talk with your beloved and just see sort of what the rituals are for them and their family specifically. There are quite a few elves with sort of mixed heritage, and so the traditions are sort of mixed as far as what each family holds as more or less important. So um, when you do select a gift, of course, it's probably good to talk with your lover about just make sure it's appropriate. Definitely, one thing you don't want to do is give any sort of dead animal. That's a big no-no, darling. You just want to avoid meats or anything that has died. Just don't. It's a very bad sign. So just avoid that. And then after that, I would say, as far as proceeding past that point, um, just talk about it with your beloved, because I think they're going to be able to give you much more specific advice. And I think the fact that you care so much and that you're trying is such a big and touching sort of thing. I think that as far as the friends and family of your hopefully soon to be betrothed are concerned, I think they'll just be so impressed that you care. Showing any effort, of course, is going to be looked on quite positively, and don't be too hard on yourself. You're expected to make some mistakes. You know, many elves spend their first century of their life sort of being brought up and taught all of these things, usually about 50 years of education. I mean, not exclusively, but 50 years worth of understanding what sort of courtship rituals are appropriate. So being able to do it in a very short time, just whatever you can do, is of course going to be looked on very positively. Now, I do want to say that you shouldn't forget about your own courtship rituals. I'm not sure how extensive hobbit courtship is, but I think your beloved will probably be interested in finding out what they should do for your family. And I think if you can sort of inform each other of what's expected, I think everyone will be much more comfortable and sort of forgiving of anything else that comes up. And I think if you understand sort of what's needed for elven courtship, and you can explain to your partner what's expected of hobbit courtship, and then you can tell each other's families. So, for instance, you can explain to all of your hobbit family sort of what the elvish rituals are. I think it's a little easier when you sort of have your own cultural context to sort of explain the importance in terms that you and yours can comprehend a little more easily. And I think then this sort of cross-cultural understanding is very easily facilitated. I'm going to stop here in the interest of time, but darling, I wish you all the best. And of course, if you have any more specific questions, feel free to send those to me, darling. I'm here to help. Or if you sort of need some help choosing a gift or whatnot, I'm here for you, darling. So have a good evening, and ta-ta.